Hello and welcome to Ancient Warfare Answers episode 181. And my name is Jasper. I'm the editor of Ancient Warfare magazine, and today I'm all by myself. Murray is sunning himself on the beach somewhere north of Sydney, he tells me, and though his connection is good enough to send us encouraging messages, it's not good enough to have a conversation. So you'll have to do it with me today. Quick note, yesterday, if you're a subscriber to the Ancient Warfare podcast, you may have accidentally had an episode of War Games, Soldiers and Strategy magazine in your ears. That was an accidental mistake in the feed. Though if you're a wargamer, you might find that interesting anyway. And you might have been notified of another podcast that I take part in, as does Angus, who records this, and some other people from War Games, Soldiers and Strategy magazine. If you're interested, wssmagazine.com. But now the question is from patron Anne. So support the magazine, support the podcast on patreon.com/Ancient Warfare Podcast. Anne wants to know about the logistics in the Second Punic War, and more specifically, she wants to know what do we know about how Hannibal supplied his troops during his campaign, particularly through the Alps, with elephants! ! Well, the with elephants part, and we can quickly say that we don't know anything about that specifically, but for any calculations that have definitely been made about this campaign, I suppose most calculations have just, there was just a handful of elephants, and you can just count them as a ton of horses, because logistics is a numbers game. And, whether you have 30 elephants or 50 versus 8,000 horses, it just means that for your calculation, you might as well just pretend that you have 8,500 horses. Whichever way you play it, it's a big logistical problem because it's all animals that need to eat. We do actually know some things about this. Both Polybius and Livy describe the earlier years of the Second Punic War quite well and make remarks about logistics and the supply. Of course, it's from the other side. It's not there's no Carthaginian sources here. They sometimes are in concert and sometimes they are, diametrically opposed, which of course is a problem. But it seems that Livy especially is trying to downplay the Carthaginian success, and trying to big up, as you might say, the Roman side and the effect of Fabius the Cunctator's tactics, and downplay the fact that the Romans were surprised by the arrival of Hannibal's army in northern Italy. And he tends to say, it went terribly for Hannibal and he just had to plunder and his armies were constantly undersupplied. There is, of course, this being the Second Punic War, a lot has been written about it, and there's a lot of debate about it. My information comes, I think I've mentioned this book before, from Paul Erdkam's book, Hunger and the Sword, Warfare and Food Supply in Roman Republican Wars, 264 to 30 BC. It was published in the late 1990s with an academic publisher, so a copy may not be easy to find, but that's definitely where you want to go for detailed information about this. And he tries to calculate how much the army would really need, how much that translates to in just plain weight. How much did they have to carry along with them, and how might you do that? And then you get to he assumes that Hannibal's Carthaginian army was about 35,000 infantry and 8,000 cavalry. And the trip across the Alps would have taken about 24 days. And you can calculate, a soldier might need so many grams of corn per day to feed himself, and you get to an amount that is, not insane for a soldier to carry along on the march. So that might have worked, at least the minimum amount, so they didn't arrive completely starving. The issue is, no surprise, with the horses. 8,000 horses, that's a lot of horses, and they need several kilos of fodder per day, depending on how you divide that. It gets to something like 400 tons of fodder, which the horses can carry some of it themselves, but they can't carry everything, which means you would need mules to carry some of that fodder with you. But if you have extra mules, then that means you need servants, and servants need to be supplied. And the mules, of course, themselves need to eat. So that reduces the quantity that the mule can take along. And you get into this sort of cascading problem where the mule train has to get longer and longer and longer. And the amount of food that each mule can effectively take for the rest of the army goes down and down and down. Of course, you can eat the mules once they've carried their effective load and they have nothing to carry anymore. You just eat the animal and then you have extra meat. But that seems to sort of be impossible. And the net result, as we know, is that Hannibal's army, when they got into Gallia Cisalpina, so that's the northern Italy, the army arrived pretty hungry. Their advantage was that area is very fertile, and the Celts there were generally fairly well disposed towards Hannibal's army. So the supply problems were solved fairly quickly, especially because they managed to capture a Roman supply depot at Clastidium in sort of central western Cisalpine Gaul. So he managed to get across the Alps during the winter, and then lands in that area at the beginning of the year in was it 218, 217 he gets there. As soon as he goes out of that area, he gets into the Italian peninsula, he gets into Roman territory, and that is a problem, but he manages to sort of match his strategic issues, which is to try and threaten Rome, really. He marches around, he wants to bring the Roman armies to battle. And the way to do that, one way to do it, is to march around, forage and plunder, and thereby supplying his army, and essentially, calling out the Roman army. Can you do something? You want to stop this, you're going to have to fight me. They're not doing it, or they are doing it and get defeated. So in those early years, his logistical needs and his strategic needs match very nicely. And in fact, when he gets to Cannae in Campania, which of course is another very fertile area, Cannae itself is a supply depot. And then there we have the big battle, which changes everything. But I think that should probably change, hopefully, give some kind of answer to how do you do it. It's the usual mix of starting out with a big supply at the beginning, just running it out, getting to a depot, resupplying, and then foraging, which, the fact that the Carthaginian army had a very large cavalry contingent was probably helpful, because the Romans didn't. And a large cavalry contingent is always a very desirable thing to have when it comes to foraging. I hope that answers the question, and if not, then I'm afraid you'll have to survive on this for a couple of weeks, because we're taking a short Christmas break. If you want to read more about this, I think we've done an episode about logistics on the podcast, and we've also done an episode, an edition about logistics in the magazine. That's about, I think it was volume 7, issue 2. I have to really quickly check while I'm talking about it, that we did a specific issue about logistics. It's a very interesting and of course hugely important topic for any army. It's 7.4, which we published in 2013. That would have been. So if you want to read more about that, check that issue out. And for now, thank you very much, and see you again later. Bye bye. Happy holidays.